day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Contextual. This lesson is brought to you by Auxin Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery Center. Remember to have access to our resources through the Instagram and also access the resource folder in our Google Drive. In this resource folder, that is where you are going to find all the resources that are going to help you in preparation for our paper 1 on the 14th of November and paper 2 on the 17th of November. Today's topic is investigation question. This topic, it is daunting to most of our learners, mainly because it is congested with information. It is rich in data. But however, this is a skill question that one can acquire if you practice, if you do more practice. Like any other topic in life sciences, this question has certain terminology that one needs to familiarize herself or himself with. So let's have a look at the terminology. Before we look at this terminology, remember grade 12 learners, this topic is in paper 1. It can be 10 to 15 marks in paper 1, also 10 to 15 marks in paper 2. Now let's have a look at the terminology that one needs to familiarize herself with or himself with. We have what we call an observation. Here we are talking about what the scientists saw, heard, or encountered, what encouraged them to investigate further. Why are we investigating? Is there a need for this investigation? Then we have what we call the hypothesis. In most cases, we are talking about a tentative explanation to a phenomenon. Another term that you need to familiarize yourself with is the aim of the investigation. The aim of the investigation, it normally starts with to determine, to find out, to investigate. And in the aim of the investigation, that's where now learners, you are going to find your two variables, your independent variable and your dependent variable. One will explain further as we move on when it comes to these variables. The control variables are the fixed variables in the investigation. Those are the variables that the investigator must keep constant. Then we have what we call the control, and we have what we call the experiment. One needs to know as well as when we speak of validity, what are we talking about? When we speak of reliability, what is it that you are referring to? And including what? Including the conclusion. What makes scientific investigation a bit daunting to most of you is because this topic is not, questions or scientific investigation questions are not confined to a certain topic. They cut across all topics in life sciences. And in most cases, you get unfamiliar context. It is very unlikely to get an investigative question that was asked to you previously. So now let's have a look at what type of questions or what kind of questions can one expect to come across when it comes to investigative question. And remember learners, investigative questions are regarded as high order questions. If one can master investigative questions, one will be able to answer all the questions in paper 1 and paper 2 with ease. So these are the questions that you need to expect when it comes to investigative questions. So now let's unpack. Firstly, in most cases, you get a question on independent variable. And remember, like we said, when it comes to terminology, independent variable, we are talking of a variable that the investigator can manipulate, the variable that the investigator can change in the investigation. This variable, it is the one that affects the outcome of the investigation. It is the one that influences the dependent variable. And the dependent variable, it is the variable that is influenced by what? By the independent variable. Another variable that you need to be able to identify, and remember learners, when it comes to that, the identification of the independent variable and the dependent variable, you are always going to get these two variables from the stem of the question or from the aim of the investigation. Another variable that you need to familiarize yourself with is the control variable, or we can say it is the fixed variable. And in most cases, actually in all cases, where you are going to get the fixed variables, it is the method that the investigator used. When reading through the method that the investigator followed, that's when you are going to see the variables that are controlled or the variables that are fixed. Why are we having this fixed variable? Is to ensure or to increase the validity of the investigation or the validity of the results. Having spoken of these three variables, now let's have a look at another question that you will come across. To define a control variable in an investigation, there is always a control and an experiment. Whenever we speak about a control, we are speaking of a group of investigation that where the investigator is eliminating the factor that they are investigating. So in a control, the factor, the independent variable, it is eliminated. And you can also get a question to say, why is there a need for a control in the investigation? Why is it important to have a control in an investigation? Remember, what makes the scientific investigations difficult is that you cannot give a generic response. You need to respond according to the data that you are given and according to the procedure that was followed. For example, here, Grade 12, if we look at to express the need for a control. If you look at the investigation, for example, if one is to investigate the effect of insulin on blood glucose level, that will be the aim of the investigation, to do what? To investigate the effect of insulin in blood glucose level. Then the procedure, you may be told that you have a group of healthy individuals. The group of healthy individuals, they will work as what? As your experiment. And also you have a group of participants that have diabetes mellitus. The group of participants that have diabetes mellitus, those ones are the ones that are going to act as your control. Then you'll get a follow-up question that says, why are we having a control? In that context and with that data that you are provided, we are having that control to ensure that the changes that you are getting in the blood glucose level are due to insulin. Hence, you cannot give a general response to say, we want to say that the changes that we are getting are due to the factor that we are investigating. So you need to be specific depending on the context and the data that you are given. Having spoken of a control or expressing the need for a control variable, there is also what we call a baseline. That is the measurement that is taken before the treatment of the independent variable tested. So the control and the baseline, they serve the same purpose. They serve the purpose of what? Of comparison. We want to say that what we are obtaining, the results that we are obtaining are due to what? To the factor that we are investigating. But as I said, that is the general response that one can give. Another one, as we've spoken, is the aim. The aim of the investigation, you always need to look out for the term or the word determine, to investigate, to find out. And in the aim of the investigation, as I've alluded to previously, to say in the aim of the investigation, that's where you get your independent and dependent variable. Then you'll get a question on listing the planning steps for the investigation. Listing the planning steps is what they investigate before carrying out the investigation. So this planning must take place before the conduction of the investigation. Depending on the nature as well of the investigation, one has to decide maybe on the sample size, one has to decide on the time in which the investigation will be taken. So all of these planning steps will depend on what? On the nature of the investigation. One has to decide on how to record this data. One has to decide on the apparatus that must be used. If it is an investigation that needs things like ethical clearance, one has to get permission in order to conduct that investigation. Another important aspect when it comes to investigation question is the reliability and validity. We're going to elaborate further to say how then should you approach this question in terms of answering, suggest how the reliability of the results can be improved. So then you go back to the method and see what is it that the investigator did. then you need to mention, not to mention what the investigator did, you mention what is it that the investigator can do to improve the reliability. When we speak of reliability, the first thing that has to come to your mind is repeatability. Reliability, we are saying, if this investigation can be done by another investigator under the same environmental conditions, will it yield the same results? Validity, it's all the factors that must be kept constant. That's when you need to go back to your method as well and check which factors were kept constant in this investigation. Then you go back to the conclusion. The conclusion, we give 2 marks or nothing for the conclusion. That's when now you need to link the observation, which is the results, with the aim, whereby 2 variables, which is your independent and dependent variable, the relationship between these 2 variables based on the results must appear in your conclusion. That's how you state your conclusion. The effect concentration is the independent variable. The minute you mention effect, you are now going back to your aim, to what we are investigating. Then you carry on, you look at the procedure. You read through the procedure, always underline, always highlight when reading. It says here, 50 coleoptils from the same species of bean plants were used. Now you are given the sample size that they used 50 coleoptils. And remember, we said when we speak of control variables, what are the factors that were kept the same? Here we are told that we have the same species of bean plants were used. All the coleoptils were of the same height. We are also talking about what here? We are talking about the control variables. The tips of the coleoptils were removed. Then you need to ask yourself, why were these tips removed? Remember here, the auxins naturally grow what? They are naturally found where? At the tip of the stem. So when we remove the tip of the stems, we are removing what? We are removing the auxins. We are ensuring that the growth of cell elongation will be due to what? To the auxins that were injected in these coleoptils. Carrying on reading, these coleoptils were then placed in 5 groups. Each group was injected at the cut surface with different concentrations of auxins. Then you were given that you have group B was injected with 2 arbitrary units of auxins. You have group C that was injected with 4 arbitrary units. You have group D, and you also have group E. Carrying on with the procedure, you are told that group A was included but was not injected with what? With auxins. That's when now you need to understand that group A serves as what? As a control. Why is group A serving as a control? Because in group A, we are eliminating the independent variable. We are eliminating the factor that we are investigating. So from the procedure then, you need now to find out what is it that the investigator did to ensure that these results are reliable? Before we even go there, grade 12s, let's have a look at our results. It says here, after 4 days, the length of the coleoptils in each group was measured and the average was calculated. Remember, generally, when we speak of ensuring reliability, we are going to say you need to repeat the experiment, you need to increase the sample size, and also take many measurements and calculate the average. But then when you are given context and data, you need to apply your general information to the context that you are given. Here, what is it that the investigator did to ensure that these results are reliable? The investigator used 50 coleoptils, and these 50 coleoptils, they were divided into what? They were divided into 5 groups, and that is what you need to mention. If we're not told, remember, why are we saying now 50 coleoptils divided into 5 groups? Because these 5 groups, they were not exposed to the same conditions. They were not exposed to the same environmental conditions. And this investigation as well, if we carry on reading, it says here, after 4 days, the length of the colloidals in each group was measured and the average was what? Was calculated. Now we look at the validity. What is it that the investigator did to ensure that these results are valid? The investigator made sure that they used what? Same species of coleoptiles. And these species, they were of what? They were of the same length. They were of the same length. So that is how the validity of this investigation was ensured. As I've spoken, we have already spoken of what? Of the control variable and the experiment. To say here, group B, C, D, and E, they serve as what? As the experiment, because it is the group that has the factor that we're investigating, which is the independent variable, which is what? The different concentration of auxins. And in group A, that's when now we have our control. In our control, we said we are eliminating the factor that we are investigating. And we said, why are we eliminating the factor that we're investigating? Why is it important to eliminate the factor that we're investigating? It is important to eliminate the factor that we're investigating in order to see that the results that we're obtaining in this case, we want to see that the average increase in the length of coleoptiles is due to what? To the different concentration of auxins only. Then we spoke of control variables here. And remember grade 12, if the question asks you to say, state 2 variables that were controlled, you are going to say the species were controlled, because already by saying control variables, we are saying they are the same. And also the same length of the coleoptiles. We use the same, the coleoptiles that we used were of the same length. But then if we say, then the question is phrased differently, and we say, how did the investigator ensure that this investigation or the results are valid? They use the same species and same length. We have already spoken to this previously to say we have 3 types of variables. But before we even speak of this 3 types of variables, grade 12s, I just want to go back to the approach of the investigative questions to say, this is how then you need to approach the investigative question, to say you are given the aim, you look at the keywords to determine, to find out, to investigate, and in your aim, that's where you get your dependent and you get your independent variable. Reliability and validity, you get from the procedure, you get from the method that the investigator followed. And for you to see which part of the investigation serves as a control, the part of the investigation that serves as a control, it will be the one whereby the independent variable, the factor that we're investigating, is eliminated. And the control variables is what the investigator kept the same. Good, moving on. As I've alluded to previously, that we have 3 types of variables. The independent variable, that is the variable that influences the outcome of the experiment. That is the variable that influences the dependent variable. That is the variable that the investigator can manipulate and can change. And in most cases, we find the independent variable in the x-axis when it comes to the graph. And the dependent variable, we normally find the dependent variable on the y-axis. And the dependent variable, it is the variable that is that has an effect on the that has an effect on the independent variable. And we have spoken also of what we call the fixed variable or the control variables. Those are the variables that the investigator need to keep constant. And look at the aim of the investigation. As I've said previously, to say, when you look at the aim of the investigation, that's where you're going to get your independent variable and your dependent variable. Reliability. What is the idea behind reliability, grade 12s? Reliability, we are saying, When we speak of reliability, we are speaking of repeatability. We are saying, what is it that the investigator did to ensure that the results are reliable, or how can the investigator improve reliability of the results? And to ensure that the results are indeed reliable, if those results were, or if that particular investigation was to be done by a different researcher under the same environmental conditions, it should give us the same results. By so doing, then we can then say that investigation is what? Is reliable. So generally, how to answer questions when it comes to reliability is you repeat the investigation, you increase the sample size, you take multiple measurements and calculate the average. But remember, that is a general response that one can give. But you need to have a look at the context that you are given and the procedure and the data that you are given and answer according to the data that you are given. Moving forward, then validity. When it comes to validity, we are talking about the accurate. How accurate are these results? The truthfulness of the results. Is the method of the results appropriate? Is the method, or is this investigation measuring what is supposed to or what is intended to measure? That is validity. And when it comes to validity, we are looking at what is it that the investigator did to ensure validity? What factors were kept constant? That is when now we are answering questions of what? Of validity. Reliability and validity. It is very important, grade 12, to have a look at the phasing of the question or the tense of the question. If now they ask you what should be done in this investigation, so you need to have a look at, or maybe the question says, what is it that the investigator did to ensure the reliability of the results? You need to go back to your method and check what steps or what is it that the investigator did to ensure that these results are reliable. If you say that in the method, there is a statement that says maybe the investigator used 20 participants in that investigation, then you need to state that 20 individuals or 20 participants were used in this investigation. That is what they did. They can rephrase the question or phrase it in a different way to say, what is it that the investigator can do to ensure the reliability of this investigation? If then they used 20 participants, then that simply means they need to use more than 20 participants to increase the reliability of what? Of the results. So you always refer back to the method to check what is it that the investigator did, depending on what? On the phrasing of the question. Now let's have a look at the questions, the investigative questions from previous papers. So this is our activities. Let's go through the activity before we can answer the questions. Scientists investigated the effect of different doses of alcohol on reaction time in humans. Remember what I've said previously. The minute you see to investigate, to determine, to find out, that is the aim of the investigation. We'll be talking now of what? Of the aim of the investigation. And from the aim of the investigation, that's where now you are going to get your independent variable and the dependent variable. So let's read through this investigative question. Scientists investigated the effect of different doses of alcohol. We are speaking here of different doses of alcohol on the reaction time in humans. A dose is the amount of alcohol given per kilogram of body mass. That is what defines a dose. The reaction time is the time it takes a person to react once a stimulus is received. So that simply means when the reaction time is higher, that person responded slower. When the reaction time is low, then the person was what? Was fast. Now let's have a look at the procedure. Remember we said from the procedure, that's where you get what? your controlled variables, that's when now you'll be able to answer questions on what? On reliability and validity. The procedure was as follows. Two 30-year-old male volunteers participated in the investigation, which was conducted over a period of 7 days. This investigation was not just conducted over a period of a day. It was conducted over a period of what? Of 7 days. They did not drink alcohol for a period of 24 hours prior to testing. There must be a reason. And remember, grade 12, the minute you are given numbers and data when it comes to investigative questions, they are not just giving you that information for the sake of giving the information. There are going to be questions that will need you to use that information. They were given different amounts of alcohol on 4 different dates. Their reaction time was determined 30 minutes after the consumption of alcohol. Then you analyze the results. The results of the investigation are shown in the table below. They are giving you now the days of the investigation, day 1 to day 7. The alcohol dose, remember we said alcohol dose is what? Is the amount of alcohol given per kilogram of the body mass. It's not just the amount of alcohol, it's the amount of alcohol given per kilogram of body mass. Then you are also provided with the reaction time of male 1 and male 2. Then you analyze the data, see what happens when the alcohol doses increases. You can clearly see that also the reaction time increases. So now grade 12, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to have a look at these questions. Then after 2 minutes, we'll then get to answer the questions. Okay, grade 12 learners, let's see how well you managed to answer the questions. Taking you back to the question, remember we said the independent variable and the dependent variable, we're getting those from what? From our aim. So here we have the different dose of alcohol and the reaction time. And I said to you, you need to start just asking yourself a question to say, which variable depend on the other? The reaction time depends on the different doses of alcohol, or does the different doses of alcohol depend on the reaction time? And the reaction time will depend on what? On the different doses of alcohol. Okay. So our independent variable here will be what? The alcohol doses, not just alcohol, but what? Alcohol doses. Then the dependent variable, you got the reaction time, which is correct. The reaction time depends on what? On the alcohol doses. Now it says, name two variables that were controlled during the investigation. So these are all the variables that were controlled during the investigation, the variables that were fixed during the investigation. We were told that the participants were males of what? Of the same age. So the age was a fixed variable, gender was a fixed variable. Volunteers were tested over a period of 7 days. The period in which the volunteers were tested on, it was fixed. It was a period of 7 days. And also, period from consumption to testing was also a fixed variable. Stage 2 ways in which the reliability of the results can be improved. Remember now, if you go back to the question or to the method, we were told that the investigator used 2 males. So now the question says, state 2 ways in which the reliability of the results can be improved. Is using, so the most correct answer will be to use more than 2 volunteers. You cannot then now say the sample size must increase. What sample size? Because you are given the data that you need to refer to. Then another way is take multiple readings of the same dose. That will be the most correct answer. Or repeat the investigation. Moving on with our question. Question number 4 says, explain why the participants only received alcohol every second day. Why is it then that the participants never received alcohol every day? Because we had to account, it says that to ensure that there is no alcohol in their body. The only alcohol that they will be tested for is the one that they were provided. Male 1 has a body mass of 93 kilograms. Calculate the amount of alcohol that he has consumed on day 7. Then you go back to the table. Let's quickly go back to the table. If you look at the table that we're provided with, you can clearly see that on day 7, the alcohol dose was 600 milligram per kg, was 600 milligram per kg. So how to calculate the amount of alcohol given? You need to multiply the body mass of male 1 with the alcohol dose on that day. So that will be 93 kg multiplied by 600. Then the answer will be 55,800 milligram. So 55,800 milligram is the amount of alcohol consumed. So also looking at the data that we were given, what is it that we can conclude on? To say higher dose of alcohol increases the reaction time, because we saw that when the doses of alcohol increases, what happened to the reaction time? The reaction time increased. So basically we're saying the higher the amount of alcohol you are taking, the slower the person will react. Now let's have a look at another investigative question. A group of researchers conducted an investigation to determine the influence. Remember we said The minute you see the word to determine, that's where you find your aim. That is your aim, to determine the influence of the type of milk on height of children drinking the milk. So that is our aim. This researcher conducted an investigation to determine the influence of the type of milk on the height. So in your aim, that's where you need to ask yourself, which one, where are my variables here? We are talking about the type of milk. We're also talking about the height. Then let's carry on with the investigation, reading the investigation. Then the investigation was conducted over a period of 7 years, from the age of 3 to the age of 10. Let's have a look now at the procedure that was used. They selected 4,146 healthy 3-year-old children of the same race and gender. Remember, we said that the minute you see same, that's when we are talking about the control variables. And the control variables, they are the ones that are ensuring that the investigation is what? Is valid. Divide the children into 2 equal groups. Do not make a mistake when they ask you about reliability. We normally say, look at the sample size, but the minute the sample size is divided into groups, you need to consider that when it comes to answering a question on reliability. One group was given 1 liter of cow's milk to drink daily. The other group was given 1 liter of soy milk to drink daily. They ensured that each group had the same additional diet, similar daily activities, similar living conditions, provided the milk from the same supplier, measured the children's height at the end of the investigation, and calculated the average. The table below shows the results at the end of the investigation compared to the expected average of a 10-year-olds. So in the table, that's when we see that the expected average, to say by the time the child is 10 years old, we are expecting that child to be 149.86 centimeter tall in terms of height. So the average height of the children that were given cow's milk is 151, which is above average, and the average height of the child or children that were given the soy milk is 147.4 centimeter, which is below the average rate. Now let's have a look at our questions. Let's have a look at our questions. The first question says, identify the independent variable. Identify the dependent variable. Name the type of variation displayed by the height of a person. State 2 planning steps that the researcher had to consider at the beginning of the investigation. I'll just give you 2 more minutes as well to go through these questions. Great, grade 12 learners. Let's see how you managed with the questions. Remember here, the aim was to determine the influence of the type of milk on the height of children drinking the milk. The independent variable is the type of milk, because the type of milk is the one that has an influence in what? In the height of children. So the height of children is influenced by the type of milk that they are drinking. So you got it correct. Name the type of variation displayed by the height of a person. In life sciences, we're only taught about two types of variation, which is the continuous variation and the discontinuous variation. And the correct one here is what? Is the continuous variation. Why height falls under continuous variation? Because when we speak of continuous variation, we're speaking of variation that has what? A range of intermediate phenotypes. We're talking of variation that has a range of intermediate phenotypes. It is not categorized. State two planning steps that the researcher had to consider at the beginning. Remember the planning steps we said, this is what the investigator has to consider at the beginning. So the investigator had to make sure that the learners, they have the same additional diet, they do similar activities, they live under same environmental or living condition, had to decide on the sample size, on how many children are to be used for this investigation. And because now it involves minors, had to even ask permission from the parents and decide also on the target group. State three ways in which the validity of this investigation was ensured. What is it that the investigator did to ensure that these results are valid? Remember, only used healthy children to ensure that this investigation is valid. And remember, I said when it comes to validity, we are looking at same this, same that. So it was of the same age and also of the same gender. Then ensure that they were given the same quality of, the same quantity of milk and additional diet. So these are all the things that the investigator did to ensure that these results are valid. Moving to our next set of questions. State one factor that could have negatively affected the validity of this investigation. What is it that could have negatively affected the validity of this investigation? Keeping the same living conditions over a period of 7 years is practically impossible. So that is one of the factors to say it is difficult to maintain the same conditions, living conditions, for over a period of 7 years. And another thing, remember we spoke of the baseline that can act as a point of reference or point of comparison. The investigator did not measure the baseline height of learners before starting with the experiment. And there are many factors, including the genetic and hormonal influence when it comes to the height. So the investigator did not consider such factors, and such factors could have an impact on what? On the validity of these results. How did the researcher ensure the reliability of the results? The researcher used 4,146 children, and they were divided into two equal groups. Grade 12 learners, you cannot just say the researcher used 4,146 children. Those 4,146 children, they were not exposed to the same conditions. We had ones that were given soy milk. You had the one that were given cow's milk. So that is why now it is very important that if you are going to mention 4,146, you need to indicate that they were divided into two equal groups. This experiment was done over a period of 7 years. That is what the investigator did to ensure what? The reliability of the results. State the conclusion for this investigation. Hopefully you got it right, that cow's milk, if you look at the data that you were provided with, cow's milk consumption leads to better growth or increased height compared to what? To soy milk. Or one can say soy milk consumption by children leads to a decreased height or below average height. Another investigative question that we are going to go through today is this one. Let's have a look at the investigative question. So hopefully you have captured all the information. The investigative question says, in 2018, a teaching hospital in India carried out a survey to determine the incidence of cancer in different parts of the female reproductive system. They carried out research by interviewing patients and studying patients' record. Then you analyze the table that you are given, grade 12s. The parts of the female reproductive system, the cervix, endometrium, ovary, vagina, and the vulva. Then the incidence of cancer in terms of percentage. Then they also gave you the incidence of cancer in terms of percentage. The first question here says, where is the cervix located in the female reproductive system? Is either one can say at the bottom, at the base or lower opening of the uterus, or at the top of the vagina. State 2 planning steps that will have been taken before the start of this investigation. What is it that one needs to consider before the start of this investigation? One has to get permission from participants. One has to get permission from the hospital. Remember, if you look at the stem of the question, we were told that they had to review. Let's go back to the stem of the question. They carry out the research by interviewing patients, so that is why it is very important for them to get permission and also studying patients' record. You cannot just study the records of individuals without getting permission from them and also without getting permission from the hospital. The investigator also had to decide on the disease to study, in this case, the type of cancer to study. They had to decide on the duration of the study. Question number 3 says, draw a pie chart to represent the data in the table. Grade 12, it is very important that when writing or when preparing for paper 1 or when going to write paper 1 and paper 2, you have the following things with you. You have your calculator, you have your ruler, you have your eraser. In case you can be asked to draw a pie chart, you are going to need a protractor so that you can measure your angles. You are also going to need a compass so that you can make a proper circular object or circumference. So if it happens that you do not draw a circular circumference using a compass, you are going to forfeit a mark when it comes to the type of a graph. And also remember now, previously, if you look at you were provided with the percentages. Before you can draw a pie chart, you need to calculate or convert the percentages into what? Into degrees. And we know that 360 degrees is what? It's a revolution in terms of pie chart. So you need to calculate, convert the percentage. That is why we are saying 56.94 divided by 100 multiplied by 360. And to see that your calculations are accurate, when you add all the degrees that you have calculated, they must amount to 360. Then as soon as you're done with calculations, that's when now you use your compass to draw a circular circle, and also you use a protractor to measure the angles. How are we then marking your pie chart? The first thing that we look at is the type of graph. Have you drawn the correct type of graph? Is it symmetrical circle showing at least one segment? The segment does not necessarily have to be correct. Do you have a caption, which is the heading? And remember, grade 12, the heading must include both your variables. It not just include both your variables, but it must show the relationship between both variables, your independent and dependent variable. Your calculations, are all your calculations correct? If all your calculations are are correct, then you're going to be awarded 2 marks. If only 1 to 4 calculations correct, you're only going to be awarded a mark. Remember, grade 12s, if your calculations are incorrect, automatically you are not going to be awarded marks for proportions, because the minute your calculations are incorrect, that will translate to what? To saying your proportions are also going to be incorrect. So remember, when going to write on the 14th and on the 17th, remember all the necessary tools that you need, your pen, pens, and preferably a blue pen, but have your calculator and have your compass and have your protractor. Apologies, grade 12, for the technical glitch in the studio. Let us carry on. The next investigative question, let's go through the procedure. An investigation was done by grade 12 learners to determine which chickens grow faster. Chickens that are selectively bred for laying eggs, or chickens that are selectively bred for meat production. The following steps were carried out. Learners bought 30 one-day-old chickens from a commercial supplier. 15 of the chickens have been selectively bred for laying eggs, and 15 of the chickens have been selectively bred for meat production. All chickens were kept under the same environmental conditions. Remember, we said the minute you say same, what does that say to you? The control variables. This included being fed the same chicken feed made mostly from cereal grains and protein source. Chickens were weighed regularly for a period of 45 days. The results of the investigation are shown in the graph. So in this investigation, the grade 12 learners are determining which chickens grow faster, the ones that are selectively bred for laying eggs or the ones that are selectively bred for meat production. And the sample size here, they bought what? They bought 30 chickens, 1 day old. And they were exposed to what? They were exposed to the same environmental conditions for a period of 45 days. The growth comparison of chickens, egg laying versus meat production breeds over time. Now you analyze the graph that you are given. The age of chickens, the life weight of chickens. Now let's go to our questions. I'm also going to give you about 2 minutes to go through this question. What is a possible conclusion you might derive from this investigation? Identify the independent variable, identify the dependent variable. State one factor that should be kept constant. You have about 2 minutes to answer the 3 questions. Great, grade 12s, welcome back. Now let's go back to the question. It says here, remember, the grade 12s were determining which chickens will grow faster. Is it the ones that are bred for laying eggs or the ones that are bred for meat production? What is a possible conclusion you might derive from this investigation? The chickens that were bred for meat production gained weight significantly, or they gain weight faster than those that were bred for egg laying. Or one can say the chickens bred for meat production are heavier than those ones that are bred for egg laying. And remember, I said when it comes to conclusions, we either give you 2 marks or nothing. Then we look at the independent and the dependent variable. Which variables depends on the other? The type of chicken or the age of chicken, but the most appropriate here one will be what? The type of chicken. To say the type of chicken, we are talking about the egg laying or the one that are bred for meat production. Then the dependent variable will be what? The live weight. To say the weight of the chicken will depend on the type of of the chicken. State one factor that should be kept constant. These are the factors that could be kept constant. Remember here, it says could be kept constant. Use the same scale for weighing the chicken. Weigh the same chickens at the same time. You cannot decide that you will weigh the egg-laying chickens in the morning and you lay the meat, the one that are bred for meat production in the afternoon. That on its own, it will affect the validity of the results. Give the chicks the same type of food. Calculate the percentage weight increase of the chicken that were selectively bred between the age of 8 and 45 days. Remember here, when it comes to the calculation of the percentage increase, you firstly start by finding the difference. To say, you subtract the initial value from the final value and you divide by the initial value. So that is why we are saying 2,500 minus 500. The 2,500 was the final value. We subtract the initial value, which is 500, and we divide by the initial value, which is 500. We multiply by 100. So the percentage increase is what? Is 400%. Remember, percentage increase is not the same as the percentage. So that is why the percentage increase here is what? Is 400%. State one advantage of repeating the investigation with 100 chicken. This is another way grade 12s in which they can ask you about reliability. Remember what we are used to. They will ask you how the investigator ensured reliability. Then maybe will say they used 100 chickens. But here, now they are telling you that this investigator repeated the investigation using 100 chickens, and the investigation as well, it was repeated. Why is that so? It is to increase the reliability of the investigation. It is to increase the reliability of the investigation. Now let's have a look at another investigative question. And this investigation, the investigation question was part of your 2025 prelim examination paper 1, and it was one of the questions that was poorly answered. Let's go through this investigation question. It says here, an investigation was carried out where a germinating bean seeds, young roots and stems were injected with auxins in a dark and gravity-free environment aboard the International Space Station. So here, grade 12, there are a few things that you need to be careful of. This investigation was carried out where a germinating bean seeds, young roots and stems were injected with auxins. They were injected with auxins, and this happens in the dark. That simply means the effect of light was eliminated, and also in a gravity-free environment. So that simply means as well the effect of gravity was what? Was eliminated. I think that is what most learners missed. They did not read the question with understanding to say, in this experiment, effect of light was eliminated, the effect of gravity was also eliminated. Let us carry on. The tip of the young roots and stems were cut off. Then you need to ask yourself, why did they cut off the tip of roots and the stem? A high concentration, not just a concentration, but a high concentration of auxins was injected into the cells at the side. It was injected into the cells at the side. So if you look at the stem, the bottom side was injected with high concentration of auxins. If you look at the root, the top part of the root, only the top part of the root was injected with high concentration of auxins. Now you need to go back to what you were taught by your teachers to say, what effect does high concentration of auxins have on the stem, and what effect does high concentration of auxins have on the root? So having to answer these questions, let's first start by the first question. It says, define the term tropism. What is your understanding on the term tropism? The second question says, explain the significance of cutting off the tip of the young roots and explain the significance of cutting off the tip of young roots and stems in this investigation. So I'm just going to give you a minute here to look at these questions. The first one, define the term tropism. What do you understand by the term tropism? Then the second question, explain the significance. Why is it important to cut off the tip of the young roots and stem in this investigation? Just a minute, then we carry on. Lovely. It says that define the term tropism. The growth or the turning movement of a plant or part of the plant in response to an external stimuli, or just in response to a stimuli. We're talking about the growth or the turning movement or the bending reaction. You can even say the bending reaction of a plant or part of a plant in response to a stimuli. The second question, grade 12, says, explain the significance of cutting off the tips of the young shoots and stems in this investigation. Why is it important to remove the tip? Because auxins, they are produced at the tip of the young roots and stems. So by removing the tip, you are removing what? You are removing auxins. So that the only auxins that we can account for is the auxins that were injected by the investigator. So that the auxins that are produced at the tip of the stem or the tip of the roots do not interfere with the injected auxins. So that is why the investigator removed the tip of the roots and the stem. After injecting the auxins, as shown in the diagram, remember we said the auxins were injected at the side. When looking at the stem, it was the bottom side of the stem that were injected with high concentration of auxins. And when you look at the root, it was the top part of the root that was injected with what? With auxins, with the high concentration of auxins. And grade 12 here, you need to remember that high concentration. Okay, let's firstly finish the question. It says here, after injecting the auxins, as shown in the diagram, the seedlings were left to grow for 10 days. Redraw the germinating seed diagram and show the expected growth after 10 days. So this is the expected growth after 10 days. Remember here, on the stem, the auxins, high concentration of auxins was on the lower side of the stem, and on the root, high concentration of auxins was right at the top part of the root. And remember, because gravity was eliminated, these auxins could not move to the bottom part of the root. And also, this was done in what? In a dark room. So you need to remember that auxins, high concentration of auxins in stems has a different effect with high concentration of auxins in roots. In stems, high concentration accelerate growth. Hence, the bottom part of the stem grew faster because high concentration of auxins in roots accelerate growth. So meaning the top part of the root cell elongation was low compared to the bottom part, hence the stem bent upwards. If you look at the root, high concentration of auxins in the root inhibit growth. So meaning the top part of the root, the growth was inhibited, hence the bottom part grew faster, hence this root bent upwards. So this was one of the challenging question in the prelim paper. So please go back, revise this section, especially experiments that have to do with phototropism and geotropism. Give the name of the hormone that causes the germination of seed of the bean seeds. Then the name of the hormone that causes the germination of bean seeds, we're talking about what? The gibberellins. So how are we then going to mark your diagram? We are going to have a look at the correct drawing of the growth of roots. If your root is growing upwards, then you were allocated a mark. We look at the correct drawing of the growth of the stem. Is it bending upwards? Then you are allocated the mark. Then the labels, stem and roots were identified, then you are allocated a mark as well. Now grade 12, let's have a look at our last investigative question. Patients infected with the HIV virus, which is HIV, are treated with the antiretroviral drugs. So that is the drug that is used to treat the HIV virus. When they miss their treatment, it can increase the chances or the probability of the virus developing resistance to the drug. Scientists conducted an investigation to determine the effect of the number of missed. Remember, we said the minute you see to determine, that's where the aim is. Scientists conducted an investigation to determine the effect of the number of missed treatments on the probability of HIV virus developing resistance to antiretroviral drugs. That's when now you need to ask yourself, which variable here is the dependent variable and which variable is the independent variable? Does probability of HIV virus developing resistance depend on the number of missed treatments, or does the number of missed treatments depend on the probability of HIV virus developing resistance? The results are shown in the table below. You are given the number of missed treatments from day 2 to day 37. You are given the probability of the HIV virus developing resistance to antiretroviral drugs. Now let's have a look at the questions. It says here, state the following: the dependent variable, the independent variable. Question number 2, based on the result, state one precaution for patients receiving the antiretroviral treatment. Question number 3, state a conclusion for this investigation. You will be afforded 2 minutes to go through the questions. Welcome back, grade 12. So let's carry on. So remember now, the investigation was about to determine the effect of the number of mistreatments on the probability of the HIV virus developing resistance to the antiretroviral drugs. And the first question was the dependent variable. The dependent variable here, we're talking about the probability of developing resistance to antiretroviral drugs. So the probability of developing resistance depends on what? It depends on what? On the number of missed treatments. So the number of missed treatments is what? Is the independent variable. Is the variable that the investigator can change, is the variable that the investigator can manipulate. Based on the result, state one precaution for patients receiving antiretroviral treatment. What is a precautionary measure that one has to take when it comes to receiving antiretroviral treatment? The patients are not allowed to miss treatments. Treatments must not be missed. State a conclusion from this investigation. Let's go back to our data. Let's quickly go back to our data. If you look at the data, the number of missed treatments and the probability. When the number of missed treatments increases, what happens to the probability of the HIV virus developing resistance? The probability of the HIV virus developing resistance increases. Okay, moving on. State the conclusion for this investigation. The probability of the HIV developing resistance to antiretroviral drugs increases with the increasing number of missed treatments. Or one can say the more days of the missed treatments, the greater the probability of the virus developing resistance to antiretroviral drugs. Moving on, describe the evolution of resistance to antiretroviral medication in the HIV virus. What is this question asking you for? This is natural selection. This is evolution in the present time. And remember, whenever we speak of natural selection, what has to come to your mind, learners, is what? Is variation. So this is how then you need to answer this question, that there is variation in the resistance of the HIV virus to antiretroviral drugs. What variation is there? Some viruses are resistant to the drugs, and some viruses are not resistant to the drugs. The viruses that are not resistant to the drugs, they are going to die, and the ones that are resistant to the drug, they are going to survive when treatments are what? Are missed. So the missing of treatments will be our selective force here. Those that will survive will do what? Will reproduce and passing the resistance to the offspring. And the most correct way of saying it is that they are passing the allele. Remember, we're not passing a characteristic. We're passing the allele of resistance to the offspring. So this is how you need to answer the question that has to do with natural selection. We have reached the end of our session for today. So hopefully grade 12, you are going to do much better when it comes to investigative questions. And as I've said previously, for you to excel in this type of questions is for you to do more investigative questions. And the more investigative questions you do, then the better understanding. And as soon as you master the investigative questions, all the other questions in life sciences, they are going to be easier to answer. Then we have reached the end of our presentation, and good luck for your session and good luck for the paper on the 14th of November and the 17th, and paper 2 the 17th of November 2025.